Welcome, everyone. Water Reuse is pleased to welcome you to this technical session of the 35th Annual Water Reuse Virtual Symposium. My name is Patrick Regan, VP of Marketing and Sales for Evoqua, leading our power and mining industry for the business. I'll be your moderator for today's session. We'd like to thank you for taking the time for this presentation, and a special thanks to our champion sponsors who will make this event possible. Just a few logistical notes before we get started. First off, please note that this will be a 90-minute session. We'll promise to make it worthwhile. This session has been pre-recorded for the most part. Please join the presenters of the session for a live chat on Tuesday, September 15th at 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time in the chat function to the right of the presentation. So now let's welcome our presenters. We'll start with Mehul Patel. Mehul is the Executive Director of Operations for Orange County Water District. He oversees water treatment for groundwater recharge operations. Mehul has been with the district for more than 20 years. He was formerly District Director of Water Production and oversaw the operations, maintenance, and staff responsible for day-to-day operations of the GWRS, Green Acres, and facility maintenance. Prior to this, as GWRS Program Manager, Mehul oversaw the award-winning facility's 30 MGD expansion. So with that, Mehul, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Mehul Patel, as Patrick said, so I'd like to give you a little bit of a background and information on how the Orange County Water District's groundwater replenishment system was first developed and some of the obstacles and considerations that we had in order to have a successful reuse project, in our case, indirect potable reuse project. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background about the Orange County Water District to kind of give you some context for why we were pursuing a recycled water project. So the Orange County Water District's unique in that it's considered a special district of the state of California, and special districts are formed for a unique purpose of one or another. And in our case, it was formed to manage the Orange County groundwater basin, which is located in the north and central portion of Orange County, where there's a large underground groundwater basin that extends into Los Angeles County as well. And you can see on the map on the right, the blue boundary around the outside is our service area. And all of the blue entities shown there, the little blue portions of the map, are different retailers in our service area. So our job is to protect the Orange County groundwater basin and keep it sustainable, because it's the main drinking water supply for 2.5 million people. And part of that management of this groundwater basin involves protecting our rights to the Santa Ana River, which is our major source of replenishment water used to maintain this groundwater aquifer. And of course, as we'll talk about in today's presentation, we've turned to other water sources as well, because those Santa Ana River flows and storm flows alone are not enough to support these 19 municipal and special water districts who rely upon our groundwater basin as their main source of drinking water. As I said before, there's 2.5 million people in this service area, and the basin on average supplies 77% of their water needs, with the remainder being imported water sources. So it's important that the Orange County Water District maintain the sustainability of this groundwater basin to ensure that these 2.5 million people have the majority of their water needs met by our groundwater basin. Next slide, please. So the project that we formed to help address the issue of water sustainability in our groundwater basin was the groundwater replenishment system. Some of you may be already familiar with it, but here's a few facts about our system. It's currently designed and it produces 100 million gallons per day of product water. And the goal is to purify sewer water, or what's better known as secondary effluent, that's produced by another agency, Orange County Sanitation District, and use that water to sustain and help replenish the groundwater basin, as well as protect it from seawater intrusion. And that's done by taking secondary effluent and putting it through an advanced water purification process that leads to a water quality that's beyond drinking water quality, with the goal of meeting or exceeding drinking water quality standards, both for the state of California and federal standards. And the way the system's designed at the current 100 million gallon per day capacity, that's enough production to produce 103,000 acre feet a year. And with the water usage rates in our service area, that's enough water for about 850,000 people. And when we went into the early planning for this project, we had hoped that if the need arose, we would have the ability to expand the facility's production capability depending upon water usage rates and drought conditions in our service area. So the original project went online in January 2008 at 70 million gallons per day. And then it was expanded in 2015 to add another 30 million gallons a day to reach the current capacity of 100 million gallons per day. And now we're in the process of doing our final expansion. So we're under construction now and hope to be complete by the first quarter of 2023 with another 30 million gallon a day expansion. And that would result in the facility reaching its build out capacity of 130 million gallons per day. What that also does is at 130 million gallons per day, we'll be recycling every bit of recyclable flows that the Orange County Sanitation District produces. And the Orange County Sanitation District's another special district in the state of California that's responsible for wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal in our same service area. So we operate and affect the same general population, which makes our partnership very important for the success of this project. So not only do we reach our build out capacity, we reach OCSD's goals of having all of their effluent that's recyclable, that's produced from their 2 wastewater treatment plants, reused for beneficial reuse. And we can accomplish that with our final expansion. And so at the current 100 million gallons per day, it's the largest indirect potable reuse facility of its kind. And in getting to that current status, there were a lot of obstacles and considerations that got us to where we are today. And that'll be the focus of the remainder of my presentation. Next slide, please. So one of the things we had to do before we considered even embarking on a project like the groundwater replenishment system was we had to evaluate where are our current sources of water coming from. And these are sources that we would consider for use in replenish our groundwater aquifer, which, as I mentioned before, is our job is to maintain this groundwater aquifer so that 2.5 million people can get the majority of their drinking water from it. So we thought about conservation, which we still preach today and still practice today, but that's essential. But again, that wouldn't be enough to cover what we foresaw for future water needs in our service area. Of course, we've always used imported water as a portion of the sources for replenishing the aquifer. Typically, we use untreated Colorado River water or state project water through the Metropolitan Water District. But then those sources are also subject to drought conditions where they're not available or less available in certain years, and their cost goes up with drought conditions and other issues. So they can't be relied upon as the sole means to meet some of these additional water needs. And then we've thought about seawater desalination, but of course, that's very costly given the salt concentrations and energy requirements. And then as many people know in California, environmental permitting for seawater desalination facilities is very difficult. So that's where we led us to recycled water being the best choice. And give you some context on why that is. Next slide, please. So as we talked about the different water supplies that we evaluated, we thought about, could we also look into full service imported water? So that's taking water that's fully treated and then trying to augment the groundwater supplies that way, or having that water available to some of our producers who use our groundwater. And again, seawater desalination was also considered, but quickly ruled out. And then when we decided upon more wastewater recycling, you can kind of see from the little bar chart there at the bottom that before the groundwater replenishment system went into effect, there was very little reclamation that made up the sources that replenish this groundwater aquifer. And we were really reliant upon the Santa Ana River and imported water, both of which are subject to drought conditions. And so their availability and efficiency from year to year is highly variable. Next slide, please. So once we settled upon recycled water being the choice for us, what we had to do was look at how could we implement a project using recycled water. We had our old Water Factory 21, which some may be familiar with. This was originally a 15 million gallon per day facility that used an advanced treatment process with high lime clarification, granular activated carbon, and did have reverse osmosis for salinity control. It operated from 1975 and operated for over 30 years. And we knew that technology was improving upon what was used in Water Factory 21. We knew that based upon pilot testing that we could produce water that was comparable to imported water, which was our goal if we recycled secondary effluent. We knew that secondary effluent was locally controlled. We have control over it. No one else is going to take it with our partnership with the sanitation district. It was always available. There's always wastewater being produced. And we knew we could produce high quality water by insisting on the highest level of treatment. And then partnering with OCSD helped make the economics and the feasibility of the project successful. Next slide, please. So the considerations that went into what is now the groundwater replenishment system and has allowed us to have the success we've had is that we knew we had Water Factory 21, and we knew that at the time at 15 million gallons per day, it was there just to feed our seawater intrusion barrier and need to be expanded. We also knew that OCSD was having issues with peak storm flow relief, where they get inundated with storm flows in their collection system, and that they didn't have enough capacity in their ocean outfall and didn't want to pursue construction of a second outfall. And so they had money that they can invest in our project. And we wanted to make sure that our project could be comparable with imported water. And then we wanted to figure out how it could be funded. And ultimately we used a combination of state and federal grants and state revolving fund or state low interest loans that made it feasible for us to pay for the capital of the project. And then we knew that we could possibly overcome the regulatory uncertainty because there weren't any recycled water or indirect potable reuse formal guidelines or formal regulations in place when we started the project and the planning for the project, but we had the success of Water Factory 21 to rely upon and make suggestions to the regulators on what type of components would need to be in the project and what kind of water quality we'd need to meet. And then we did extensive pilot and demonstration testing, which made us confident that we could come up with a treatment process, microfiltration, reverse osmosis, ultraviolet light, with hydrogen peroxide or advanced oxidation to produce the highest quality water. And then we knew we had to have an extensive and robust outreach program to overcome some of the failures that we saw in other recycled water projects in Southern California in the early 90s, where negative public opposition kind of doomed those projects to failure. And so we had a robust outreach plan to help overcome those issues. And so once we took all of these considerations into effect, we were able to produce a partnership with OCSD and a successful project that's still running today. And as I said, will be expanded in 2023. So it was a long process, over 20 years to get to the start of it, but it was one that in the end was successful through a lot of careful consideration and planning. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Patrick.
Excellent. Thank you, Mul. That was very informative. I appreciate that. I don't want to drag this out, and I want to get us right to our next speaker, who I will say, for those looking at the video, is hands down our best dressed thus far. So Andy, thank you for joining us. I wanted to just quickly do a basic introduction. And quite an impressive resume, Andy, that you have here. Andy's Carollo's Water Reuse Practice Director. Andy has led more than 60 advanced treatment designs, pilot tested more than 100 systems, and conducted more than $10 million in applied research. Andy has been honored with the Water Reuse Person of the Year Award, and has been part of teams honored by the CWEA Research Achievement Award, the Water Reuse Association Innovation Project Award, and the International Water Association Market Changing Water Technology Award. So Andy, thank you so much for joining, and take it away.
Great. All right. Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to spend a few minutes getting the thought process going on water supply resiliency, and the focus here really is on building a water infrastructure that can withstand the challenges of climate change and population growth. And of course, we're doing it through water reuse today. So next slide, please. All right. So important to just define resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, so elasticity. Next slide, please. So if we just take a moment, and I'm out in California, and we have seen these drought cycles, and they have been punishing. And as this is Lake Oroville, one of the major water supplies for Northern California. And over the last large drought cycle, we've seen floods and almost empty reservoir systems, all in the same place. And these photos are taken from just about the same location from 2014 to 2020. Next slide, please. So not only is our reservoir systems, their elasticity has been stretched to the limit, and in some cases close to broken. The groundwater systems in California also have seen challenges, and the Central Valley of California, for example, has had large subsidence due to overdrafting of the groundwater, and so we lose some of our storage ability, some of our resiliency by not managing our groundwater basins well. Photo here of loss of 5 feet over 25 years in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley. Next slide, please. So, we now have the science to know how bad these droughts are. We can look at tree rings going back to the time of Charlemagne and the Viking raids on Europe, and the drought cycle we're in now is one of the 5 worst. It appears to maybe even be the 2nd worst in that 1,200-year period. And these droughts will come back, and as we see with climate change, challenges appear to be accelerating. Next slide. So I don't know about all of you, but I spend far too much time checking the US Drought Monitor, and there's good news now and then. And we've seen parts of the country come in and out of drought, but the Western US seems to keep coming back. And so these are 2-year snapshots from 2010 to 2020. And we never quite get clear and have a well-stocked water supply for the future. And that's really the point of this initial conversation, is to talk about what does it take now to invest in the future. So we do have this robust infrastructure, this robust water infrastructure for the Western US. Next slide. So we've heard this several times before in different presentations through the years at Water Reuse, and it's true. When the well is dry, we know the worth of water. Next animation, please. But we understand the magnitude and impact of our drought cycles now. We've got data like I showed before, and a lot more of it. We now know that our water supply must function independent of Mother Nature. We can't rely upon a uniform yearly recharge of our groundwater basins or our reservoir systems. Next animation. So it's not quite as famous of a quote, but it really applies, which is a stitch in time saves 9. Again, what do we do now to prepare ourselves robustly for later? Next slide. And recognizing that advanced treatment's expensive. So when we're talking about membrane-based, RO-based treatment as an example here, building large systems that just sit idle and wait for the drought, that's costly. $7 to $9 per gallon. So a 10 million gallon a day facility could run you $80 to $100 million just for the treatment. There are other non-RO treatment processes, which will be discussed, that can save some costs, but it is still very expensive. So how much treatment systems do you build? How much infrastructure do you build now that you don't necessarily need today? Next slide, please. So I want to just, I'm going to spend a few minutes on this table, so bear with me. But looking through 4 different projects that have either been completed, are underway on the design side, or being planned. And this is a mixture of, at the top, I'll go through the top row, conventional raw water projects, direct potable reuse projects, and indirect potable reuse projects. Different ways to build that infrastructure ahead of when it's needed. So I'll just go down to the second row and the first column on the left. So the first project, project number 1, is a conventional raw water project where it takes a new raw water supply, builds a water treatment plant. This project is constructed, a large facility, very expensive. And the goal of that project is an entirely redundant water supply for their community in the event of some catastrophic events. The system's run at 10%. You can't just mothball it entirely. And it provides standby for loss of the primary water supply for a community. Next animation, hopefully. There we go, project number 2. This project has been planned, and it's much like project number 1. It's smaller, so the investment is $75 million, and that's because the community is smaller. And these are all, by the way, all 4 of these projects are in different states across the Western US. So project number 2 is, again, a redundant alternative water supply. And the size of that project, again, pulling new raw water, building a new water treatment plant from a entirely different source. The size of that project is dictated by the potable water supply demands in the winter, so non-irrigation season. Make sure you have enough water for your community. Project number 3. There we go. So that's direct potable reuse, and it's under design. And for DPR or potable reuse, it's a large system. For a water supply, a general water system, it might not be considered the same size, but it's a medium-size advanced water purification facility. And the goal of that project is to use DPR to alleviate the reliance on other conventional supplies. So build it, not mothball it, run it as a baseline flow. And in that way, alleviate these other water supply demands from conventional supply. And the last one, please. This one's really interesting. It's indirect potable reuse. It's under investigation. It's a small advanced water purification facility. Costs still haven't been worked out yet. But the goal is drought resiliency. And it's recharging a groundwater basin slowly. So there's a groundwater basin that has a lot of space. It's slowly recharging that groundwater basin so that 10 years from now, when a massive drought hits, you can extract at a very high rate. So it's a small investment, constant production, but high rate extraction. Interesting concept to build that resiliency. So next slide, please. This is my last one. So a few closing comments to think about and to stimulate some discussion. Overbuilding capacity is costly, but in some cases may be necessary. And when that's done, it's nice to be able to use that equipment. So the direct potable reuse is an example where you provide that high capacity treatment and base flow to alleviate demands on conventional supply. And then look for ways to increase storage gradually when the rain is falling, when the groundwater basins aren't being taxed too much. Let's fill them up so we can slowly fill them up and then allow for high use during extreme drought conditions later. IPR is a way to do this for that concept of small flow now, big extraction later. And I think that wraps it up. Thank you.
Andy, that's excellent. I'm sure we'll have quite a few questions. It's definitely a different approach, and I think for most of us in the industry, I certainly consider it a welcome approach. So with that, just moving forward to our next panelist, we have the privilege of having Wendy Broley, who's going to speak to us. I think give us some big picture considerations. Wendy, hopefully I can do your introduction justice, but as the screen shows, Wendy is a professional engineer, and more importantly, is the vice president and one water leader responsible for setting the strategy and managing the Brown & Caldwell's growing One Water team. With 18 years experience in the water and wastewater engineering, and with 18 years of experience in the in water and wastewater engineering and operations, Wendy works with clients, partners, and technology providers to evaluate alternative water uses and develop diverse and resilient water supply portfolios. Her experience includes integrated water planning and process engineering for an array of membrane and advanced treatment systems for potable reuse, surface water treatment, and groundwater desalination applications. So Wendy, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's really, it's a great topic. If you could go to the next slide. What I thought I might do is just offer a bit of an overview of the types of considerations that need to be factored in when evaluating a reuse project. I actually just wrapped up a research project that I led with the Water Research Foundation on anticipating trade-offs associated with alternative water supplies. Water reuse, of course, being one of them. And it really encourages agencies to look at these opportunities from a number of different angles. Whether an agency chooses to implement water reuse, which is an incredibly site-specific decision, and how they might implement a water reuse strategy would be dependent on a number of different things. For instance, the drivers, are they compelling enough? For instance, depending on the circumstances, and we heard a lot from Andy about supply reliability and resilience, but in some cases, that may not be an urgent enough driver to move a project forward, to spend the money. Often it's the need to spend money on a different part of the system. Perhaps it's costly wastewater infrastructure or upgrades that might drive a reuse project with supply reliability and resilience as an additional benefit and consideration. Moving on to system characteristics. What are the existing supplies and are they at risk? Got to consider your geology. Think about your proximity to basins or reservoirs or the ocean or any other critical infrastructure for the success of your project, like a brine line as an example. Understanding these facets of your system will help determine the feasibility or favorability of reuse as an option. It'll influence the cost and the regulatory structure you'll be working within, which moves us to that regulatory framework. Is there a regulatory framework for the reuse strategy that you'd like to consider in your state? Are there regulatory constraints perhaps that would limit the feasibility of the project? And these are important considerations. We heard from Mehul about the importance of partnerships. So not every agency is in control of every aspect of the reuse project. So is there an agreement in place, for example, or do you have at least willing partners to proceed down this path? And community support, for a long time, I think public perception and acceptance felt like such a roadblock, but I know a number of agencies who have really led down a path towards greater outreach and education that has made public perception something that can really be overcome. But community support is more than just that public perception around reuse. It also has a lot to do with economics. So you've got to be thinking about the capital and O&M costs. And we talked about, Andy talked a little bit about this, but thinking about how it compares to existing supplies, considering your customer base and where the demand is located, because it can look, it doesn't have to be potable reuse that we're thinking about. It could be a number of different types of reuse strategies. So you got to think about that demand, but really being cognizant of affordability in your community. And how do you need to think through and look for funding that will support a water affordability that makes sense for your community. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a sec. But then these last two, operations and technical issues, really incredibly important. Operational expertise is a major issue for many agencies who realize that it's not just the treatment equipment that makes or breaks a successful reuse project, but really having capable operators is absolutely key. And then there's other technical issues. For example, emerging contaminants like PFAS, for example, can really influence the need for greater levels of water purification in your region. And that might steer you towards reuse strategies. brine management can create significant challenges. So if that needs to be a part of your treatment strategy, there could be some significant limitations to consider, and we're going to dig into that in just a sec. You can go to the next slide. So funding and community support, two really important keys to a successful reuse project. We are working, Brown and Caldwell is working with a small agency, Soquel Creek Water District, who serves about 40,000 residents. They've got groundwater as a single source of supply in their area, and they've been dealing with seawater intrusion, which has an impact on the water quality of their water supply. Now, this is a community that conserves like crazy. They've done an incredible job at water use efficiency and conservation, but they have found that they need to diversify their supply for greater resilience and supply reliability. And they need to address these seawater intrusion issues, this other additional driver of which there are many. And so the project itself is an advanced water purification facility for groundwater recharge. And it's on the order of about $100 million for conveyance and treatment. But for such a small agency with such a small rate base, that's a heavy lift for the community. So part of what's making this project a reality is their ability to bring in about $52 million in grant funding to cover conveyance and the injection wells for groundwater recharge, and then $49 million in low interest WIFIA loans through the EPA. So not only have they been able to fund their project almost entirely and reduce the impact on their community from an affordability standpoint, they've also been able to demonstrate through the study that they did with Stanford a huge economic benefit to the community, and that adds to that community support. So thinking about public perception, not just in terms of the yuck factor, but in terms of how does this help our community? How does this strengthen us? Then next slide, please. Okay, so technical and operational considers definitely influence the cost and feasibility of implementation of a reuse strategy. You know, when you think about brine management, I often say it's the tail that wags the dog. Depending on your disposal opportunities, what's available to you, if you don't live, for instance, near an ocean with an easy ocean outfall to work with, or if you're not close to a brine line, if you happen to live or your system exists in an inland area that is really disconnected from some of these opportunities, or if you live in a state where maybe deep well injection isn't something that's available to you, it can really influence the cost of brine management. In some cases, the cost of brine management to deal with this extra 10 to 15% of flow from your system, highly saline concentrated flow, can cost as much as the treatment for the rest of the whole project. That is a significant influence on the feasibility of a project. So in those scenarios, we've got to innovate, and finding alternative strategies or eliminating brine altogether can be really, really important. We actually did a study with City of Flagstaff, and what you can see here on the right-hand side, which I am concerned that perhaps our videos may be actually overlapping with the important information. What you're seeing here is that we did a study with the City of Flagstaff in Arizona to evaluate different reuse opportunities and determine how best to proceed given the specific constraints in their area around brine disposal. So we looked at carbon-based approaches, and in this case, we're talking about ozone and biofiltration in lieu of reverse osmosis, which would produce that really highly concentrated, very saline solution that needed to be managed and disposed of. So what we found was that we can save approximately $100 million with a non-RO-based treatment approach. That's the punchline that you may not be able to see if you can't see that chart fully. However, I will say that not all regulatory frameworks enable this type of an approach. And so it is something that needs to be considered back to that regulatory framework that I mentioned earlier. The other thing is high recovery RO. So we're alternatively evaluating high recovery RO strategies like closed circuit reverse osmosis or flow reversal technologies to reduce the amount of RO concentrate when RO is required, whether that's due to the regulatory framework that you're dealing with or the need to reduce salinity from your influent flow. So this is really a part of our industry that is ripe for innovation, and we're working in partnership with our clients. In fact, we're currently testing this right now with the city of Santa Monica, both of these technologies. But working with them to mitigate the risk associated with innovative solutions, the goal being to confirm the value proposition at the bench and the pilot scale before you think to implement it at full scale. It's a really important step in the process. We'll hear a little bit more about what that can look like later on. Operational expertise. You know, we work really, really hard to regulate, plan for, design, and implement treatment facilities that'll protect public health at all times. But a successful reuse facility isn't just about the equipment, it's about the operators that run them, and making sure that they have necessary experience is absolutely key. Until recently, actually, the water and the wastewater operator certification programs didn't cover advanced water treatment, didn't cover potable reuse, but through a collaboration between AWWA Cal Nevada and CWEA in California, there is now an advanced water treatment operator certification program that is helping to fill that gap. And a number of the folks on this panel actually were very involved in the development of that program. And at the same time, for those that don't have access to a certification program like that, we can do a lot during the development of a project to help support operators in gaining a better understanding of technologies that they'll be operating. On an agricultural reuse project right now with the city of Escondido that's going to leverage microfiltration and reverse osmosis membranes, we started having Membrane 101 classes with their operational staff, even before the design occurred. Because we wanted them to have a better feel for the technology that they would be working with, and so that they could be in a better position to and be involved and influence the design during that phase of the project development with the project team. So we can definitely support that moving forward. So if you could go to the next slide. I'd like to end just with a little call to action. I think when it comes to moving water reuse projects forward, I encourage everyone to, all the agencies that are looking at this or private companies to collaborate with willing partners. Reuse isn't often something that you can do as a single agency or a company. Evaluate cost-effective and treatment strategies, innovate to do more with less or achieve what traditional technologies can't achieve, and regulate, obviously. We encourage regulation of potable reuse, whether it's advanced versions of direct potable reuse in states like California and elsewhere, but even if you live in a state where potable reuse isn't codified, recommend encouraging that as well. And we also want to push for the incorporation of more carbon-based strategies so that we can be enabling more flexible reuse options moving forward. Hand it back to you, Patrick.
Excellent. Thanks, Wendy. That was fantastic. Again, I certainly have a couple follow-up questions for you, but we'll save that towards the end. And just a point to the audience, right? Just the joy of a virtual session. Just to remind the team, again, this is a recorded session, and you know, certainly we look forward to doing this again live in the future. But as such, we do have a live Q&A active. So if you look to the side of the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat, and we have our panelists live and would be happy to respond via chat with whatever insight they're able to provide. So with that, just switching gears a little bit, wanted to provide some perspective from one of our technology providers who's on the panel. We have the privilege of having Russ Swerdviger on the call. Russ is, I'll say on a personal note, somebody that I'm fortunate to have known for many years. But Russ is the Global Marketing Manager for the municipal market at DuPont Water Systems. Russ has 20 years of experience in the water and wastewater industry. is currently serving as the treasurer for AMTA, that is the American Membrane Technology Association. Russ has a BS in chemical engineering from Colorado School of Mines and MBR, or I should say MBA, sorry, I've mistyped there, an MBA from the University of Denver. So with that, Russ, please take it away.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate the introduction. So I'm just going to highlight some of the treatment technologies in ReUse, talk a little bit about what's been used, how it's advancing, and maybe even a couple of ways to get some new technologies and apply some current technologies in different fashions as we look into the future. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the reuse of wastewater, technology is what enables it. These membrane-based technologies, non-membrane-based technologies, advanced disinfection, all of these technologies have to come together to drive wastewater reuse. We've got our industry has a 30-plus year track record of safe and reliable reuse performance with these technologies. Most of that to date has been in what we'll call indirect potable or industrial reuse. And as you've heard the previous speakers talk, the direct potable reuse is beginning to gain more and more traction. As technology providers, we're always trying to advance the technology to enable a more cost-effective treatment train, so we can expand the demand profile for reuse. Next slide, please. If we look at the whole concept of reuse from water scarcity, you can see by reusing water, how much water we can save, how much better we can make our use of water in the water cycle. In a future state, the ideal state from my perspective at least is to have 100% reuse. And that's a very, very audacious goal, but I think that's what we're all working towards. And by reusing that water, we're going to reduce environmental pollutions. We're going to reduce some of the dumping hazardous chemicals, and and really helping to overcome and get through some of them drought situations when they occur. Next slide, please. So when we talk about reuse, most of the technology work to date has been on getting those wastewaters using the separate membrane separations or non-membrane based separations and disinfection to beyond drinking water standards. The next one of the next frontiers of treatment is that biological piece. Can we develop and implement technologies that make the biological treatment more cost effective in terms of capital and operating expenditures? And one emerging technology are these membrane aerated biofilm reactors, where we have gas permeable membranes that sit in the biological process and are growing a biofilm on these membranes that's doing the biological treatment. You're getting complete oxygen transfer to the biomass. And you talk about resiliency, these MABR systems, they can recover very rapidly from shocks. And really importantly, the aeration energy required to do that biological treatment can be reduced up to 75%. So this is an emerging frontier in terms of the technology development and technology deployment when we're considering the full reuse train. Next slide. We've been enhancing the technology providers have been enhancing membrane processes. A lot of focus and work has gone into what I think we can classify as operational cost reduction. When we look at the UF membranes themselves, we've seen over the years dramatic increases in permeability and durability. So that means less energy we're using during the filtration process. Membranes are lasting longer, so there's fewer change-outs. MBRs, a lot of work has gone into reduced aeration energy. Right now, you look at some of the designs that are coming out over the years, dramatically, the RAS pump, so there's fewer change-outs, is actually the biggest energy consumer in the MBR process. It's no longer the aeration. Right now, I mean, I don't know if you would have asked folks 20 years ago if there would ever be an MBR plant with membranes lasting between 12 and 15 years, if you get somebody to say, yeah, they agree with that. But we're seeing that today. We're seeing membranes last beyond 10 years. Again, driving out the operational costs. The RO membranes have advanced significantly during this 30-year period as well. We're reducing energy consumption, we're improving cleanability, driving out those operational costs of reuse. And I know Zachary is going to talk a little bit more detail about it, but we're enhancing the significantly during these membrane processes, especially when it comes to pathogen removal in the MBR of reuse. Those principles from drinking water filtration and seeking to adapt them into the area of reuse, so we can gain. We're taking a lot of those, gain more confidence of the broader public, have some real tangible data to point to show, yes, this is a very, very safe approach to ensuring confidence of the data to point to show, yes, our water supplies. Next slide. Now, how can we apply these technologies to enable reuse cost effectively? I think you heard Wendy start talking about this. Now, how can we apply to enable reuse? Well, one approach that our company has considered is a minimal liquid discharge, where we're tailoring a system to allow for the goals to be solved for the problem at hand, treating for a very specific purpose. So in a lot of instances, especially for some industries, it's a zero liquid discharge, and to make this economically feasible, we've got to squeeze out as much water from that process, that wastewater recovery process, so that we can minimize the biggest cost item, which is going to be the evaporation wastewater recovery process. Slide, please. So when you look at an example process train, this one, for example, is a textile wastewater. Treating the discharge. You treat to a discharge standard, 60 cents per meter cubed. If you take a minimum MLD to a ZLD, you can see the treatment cost coupled with the recycle value gets you a net value that's pretty close to that treatment to discharge. So solving a very specific problem of minimizing that evaporator crystallizer can really help enable reuse. When you compare it to thermal zero liquid discharge only, you can really see that cost benefit. And this is one way where taking these new technology advancements and working collaboratively, as we've heard from previous speakers, can help us adapt these technologies into new ways, new approaches of solving some of these water scarcity problems. Next slide. I think that's all I got. Yeah, and with that, I want to close. Patrick, thank you for you and water reuse for giving me the opportunity to talk. And from a technology supply perspective, we're here to be part of the team going forward. Looking forward to continuing this discussion.
Great, Russ. Thanks for joining, and apologies again for messing up your MBA. But I think maybe MBR. I just kind of naturally had that in my head when I was introducing you, so I think it worked regardless. All right, so moving forward with our next panelist, we have the opportunity to have Zachar Harani as part of our discussion. Zachar is certainly anyone that's done any water reuse projects in Southern California, especially those that are membrane-based, are very familiar with his expertise. I'll expand on that a little bit. He is Stantec's water reuse practice leader for North America. He has process design expertise in wastewater and advanced water treatment for reuse applications with emphasis on MF, UF, MBR, and RO processes. Some of his advanced water treatment projects includes City of San Diego's advanced water treatment facility at the North City Water Reclamation Plant, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California's advanced water treatment facilities at the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant, and City of Los Angeles AWT facilities at the Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant. He has authored over 70 papers and publications in national and international conferences and peer-reviewed journals. So with that, Zachar, please take it away.
Thanks, Patrick. So next slide, please. So for my presentation, I'll start with the drivers for portable reuse, especially in California. What are those on the wastewater side as well as on the drinking water side? And then I will talk about some specific large portable reuse projects that we are currently working on that will be brought online in next 15 to 20 years, and that will help out the region substantially in terms of self-reliance for portable water supply. So for the drinking water supply side, as Andy and Mehul talked about earlier, we are very reliant in California on out-of-state potable water sources. And we are seeing declining water supply as well as increasing population. And there was a good report done a few years back on direct portable reuse from Water Reuse Foundation that stated that we can actually satisfy the municipal needs of about 20% of the California's population by 2020. So recycled water can substantially augment the existing water supply. And direct and indirect portable reuse are becoming more and more popular when it comes to this supply augmentation. So we are clearly seeing a shift from several recycled water irrigation applications, purple pipe applications, to more centralized portable reuse applications where you can use your existing conveyance infrastructure to supply water to your existing customers. So that shift is happening. Mehul talked about the Orange County GWRS, and there are several other large portable reuse projects that's going to come online, and that will even intensify this trend of moving from decentralized to centralized water reuse projects. From the wastewater side, next slide, please. We are anticipating more and more stringent nutrients regulations for the existing wastewater treatment plants. And some of the largest plants in the state right now, they produce either advanced primary or non-nitrified secondary effluent. And these plants may be required to meet either ammonia or total nitrogen limits in future. Some of those large plants in Southern California, especially, include the Point Loma wastewater treatment plant in San Diego that produces advanced primary effluent, about 140 MGD of capacity. The treatment flow right now. The Joint Water Pollution Control Plant, that's another one that's in Carson, that is operated by LA County Sanitation Districts that discharges about 260 MGD of non-nitrified secondary effluent to the ocean. And then City of Los Angeles' Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant that also produces a non-nitrified secondary effluent, 262 MGD. So all of these treatment plants, they have very site-specific limitations, and the footprint is one of the biggest concern. So when you want to go from non-nitrifying to a nitrifying effluent, or if you want to add secondary process like it would be in the case of Point Loma, footprint becomes a big concern because first you need to add the secondary process, and then second you need to operate that secondary process at a higher SRT, which typically requires a larger bioreactor volume, unless you use a membrane-based treatment like MBR, which operates at high mixed layer concentration. So a lot of these facilities are moving towards implementing membrane-based option to satisfy their future limits. And when you are treating the water to that extent, it doesn't make sense to put it in the ocean. So reusing it makes a lot of sense, and there is a lot of synergy between the drinking water agencies and the wastewater agencies to try to reuse as much of this water as they can. So with that, next slide, please. I'll talk about the three planned major portable reuse projects in SoCal that Stantec is involved with, along with our partners. The very first one is Metropolitan Water District's Regional Recycled Water Program that's going to bring online about 150 MGD of product water. It's going to use MBR Auto UAOP process train. The second one we're going to talk about is City of Los Angeles' Hyperion 2035 program. That is another large portable reuse program that's going to bring online about 220 MGD of product water. And then finally, City of San Diego's Pure Water Program, Phase 2, that's going to bring online 53 MGD of product water. Phase 1 was about 34 MGD. So with this two phases of City of San Diego's program and Met's regional program, City of Los Angeles' Hyperion 2035 program, when brought online, there will be about 500 million gallons a day of portable reuse capacity that will be brought online, and that will make our region, Southern California, a lot more self-reliant. So I'm excited to be part of these projects, and let's talk about the projects in a little bit detail. Next slide, please. So the very first program is led by MWD along with its partner, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. And like I stated here, the driver is on both sides. LACSD want to eliminate the nutrient discharge as much as they can to the ocean in the long run, whereas MWD would like to reuse all of that water that is currently going to the ocean. So there is a good synergy between the two agencies. And MWD is the nation's largest wholesale water supplier. So they serve about 19 million people in about 5,200 square miles of service area. And they support about $1 trillion in regional economy. So a very large water agency. And the biggest issue they are facing is that 55% of their water is currently imported either from Northern California or from outside of state from Colorado River. And they want to minimize that reliance and try to develop some local sustainable water supply sources. Next slide, please. So to talk about the Regional Recycled Water Program, like I said earlier, it's a collaboration between Metropolitan and LA County Sanitation Districts. Stantec with our partners, Carollo and Russell are supporting this program. And we are in the process of operating the demo facility that you can see on the map up there. That's a map of Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. Produces about 260 MGD of non-notified secondary effluent. And right next to it will be the full-scale advanced water treatment facility. And within that footprint, we have a small demo plant operating that will be used to obtain the permit for the full-scale facility. About 150 MGD of product water will be produced from this project, which will be used to recharge 4 different groundwater basins within LA and Orange County. And the best part about this project, at least for me, is that this is going to be the first in the country to use MBR-based portable reuse train. It is doing so at a demonstration scale and eventually at the full scale. So very exciting project for the region as well as for the industry in general, because it's going to set the trends for a new full advanced treatment train that could be reused at several of the sites. And the figure at the bottom is just the conceptual layout of the full scale facility that Stantec and its partners put together. And as you can see, we have MBR on the left-hand side, tertiary MBR, as well as RO and advanced oxidation on the right-hand side. So this is upon full buildup, it can produce even more than 150 MGD of product water. Next slide, please. The next big program is being led by City of Los Angeles, Bureau of Sanitation. And City of Los Angeles serves about 4 million people, and Bureau of Sanitation is a sort of a sister agency of LA County Sanitation Districts. And together they serve about 9 to 10 million people. The average system flow that City of Los Angeles sees is about 300 MGD, For LA County sanitation districts, it's about 400 MGD. And Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant is one of their 4 wastewater treatment plants, and the largest one in the region for them. And it treats about 262 MGD of wastewater, and only 27% of that water is currently being reused. So the city's mayor has set a goal to recycle 100% of the wastewater by 2035, which brings the name of the program, which is Hyperion 2035 program. So this project is led by Carollo and Stantec team, and we are really excited to take this all the way through. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of potable reuse projects happening at Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant, and these are at different stages. The one on the top that you see is a 3D model for a production facility that's 1.5 MGD that's currently under construction, under design. And this is something that will provide a proof of concept for the full-scale facility. So it has a same process train as the full-scale facility is anticipated to have, MBR Auto AOP, and it's going to be brought online in the next few years. The layout that I've shown has a 5 MGD capacity, but the facility actually is going to be designed and constructed for 1.5 MGD. So Carollo and Stantec team are serving as owner's engineer on this, and then we have Walsh and BNC that are design build entity on this. The next project down, that's a 3D model of a demonstration facility, and that's the 1 MGD Hyperion MBR pilot facility. And this facility is going to be a tool for a city to really develop the necessary information, the data that is required for regulatory approval of the full scale, get the pathogen credits for MBR and overall approval of the full scale train. So this has 3 different membrane systems that will be tested in parallel, Koch, Suez, and DuPont, and we also have a common bioreactor. And this facility, again, it's a joint effort within City of Los Angeles with its 2 different agencies, Bureau of Sanitation and Department of Water and Power, and also West Basin Municipal Water District. So this is a very exciting project. Hopefully next year we will get to see this facilities actually built, at least the one in the bottom, so we can get it up and running. Next slide, please. The third program that's one of the largest, again, in the country would be City of San Diego's Pure Water Program, Phase 2. So City of San Diego relies heavily on outside water sources. So about 90% of the water is imported. And the biggest drawback with the San Diego is that they don't have the groundwater aquifers like Orange County has. So they have to rely heavily on the reservoirs if they want to do indirect or direct potable reuse. So in this case, the Pure Water Program, it actually got started from the concerns with the Point Loma wastewater treatment plant. Because the regulators are expecting Point Loma wastewater treatment plant to lower its discharges to the ocean, one of the agreements that they reached with the city is that city will reuse as much water as they can by diverting the water away from Point Loma wastewater treatment plant and building these advanced water purification facilities. So the Phase 1 was already built at North City Water Reclamation Plant. That's being under construction now. And then the Phase 2, it's going to be in the central area near the airport in San Diego. And that's going to produce about 53 MGD of recycled water. And the goal is to treat the water and either get it to Lake Murray or San Vicente Reservoir. And depending on where it goes, the regulatory requirement may be different. So that brings to the next slide. So if the city decides to put the water in Murray Reservoir, then the biggest concern is that the retention time in that reservoir, based on the plant capacity of the advanced water treatment plant, is 1 month. And that is less than 2 months that is required if you want to keep it as a surface water augmentation project. So now this becomes a raw water augmentation project because you have a smaller than desired retention time. So the city is planning to look at this as a raw water augmentation, which is a direct potable reuse project, and plan for it just in case they have to use a different option. So they are open to either go to Murray Reservoir or the San Vicente Reservoir. So in this figure here, we are showing different elements. So we have a source control program that city is undertaking. Then we have water reclamation plant. That's going to be a new facility that's going to treat water diverted from Point Loma wastewater treatment plant, and also water purification facility or pure water facility. Next slide, please. So with respect to the wastewater treatment plant, the goal is to really look into membrane-based treatment. Again, this is also a very footprint constrained site. So everything is going to happen right next to the airport in a very small footprint. And current consideration is to look at primary treatment or primary clarification followed by MBR for wastewater treatment, and then ozone BAC, MFRO, AOP process train for the pure water facility. And they will all be housed very likely on the same site in a very small footprint. And the water from there, it's going to be pumped into Mura Reservoir, and then it's going to go to the drinking water plant and eventually to the customers. Next slide, please. So all three of these large portable reuse programs are going to use, or at least considering using MBR-based portable reuse train. And one of the biggest challenges has been for MBR process to get pathogen credits for the process. So the current approved train in the state of California is MFRO AOP and MF, which is membrane filtration, low pressure. Either MF or UF gets the law credits for pathogens, and MBRs do not. So that's our biggest challenge moving forward, and we are collecting information, data needed to really get those credits for the MBR process. And some of that work has already started with MWD's regional program. And we also want to see, how does the RO perform directly downstream of the MBR. So that's another key challenge we want to address. So that's all I have. Thanks, Patrick.
No, it was great, Tucker. I appreciate that. Getting to the home stretch here, and with a little bit of Q&A on the back end, but just as much as we've been talking a lot of really, I'd say exciting municipal projects, wanted to round out the conversation with a little bit of industrial perspective. And so with that, wanted to introduce Mark Hunsaker to the conversation. Mark is admittedly, I'll say, and I mean this honestly, Mark, one of my favorite coworkers. Mark's been with Evoqua for over 23 years now. Mark, you're the director of application engineering for effectively our industrial segment, representing about half of our $1.5 billion portfolio. Also, Mark serves as on the board of directors and is vice president of Evoqua's Treated Water Outsourcing Corporation, one of the subsidiaries of the organization. And just a little bit about Evoqua, a quick shameless promotion or advertisement. Evoqua has an extensive portfolio of proven brands, advanced technologies, mobile emergency water supply and treatment solutions, and services which are applied to helping municipalities and industrial customers protect and improve the world's most fundamental resource, water. So with that, Mark, bring us home.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. And it's great to kind of round out this fantastic team that we've been able to pull together for this water reuse discussion. As Patrick said, my discussion is going to be a little bit more centered around the industrial side of the business. And it really hits on Wendy's call to action. Her last part of that slide there is, I really want to help the team think about how you can identify opportunities within your facilities and start really getting into some practical water reuse type applications. So next slide, please. When we think about recycle drivers, I'm sure during this whole conference, you guys are getting this hammered into your brains here. When we think about utility limitations, we think about water scarcity, we think about these different supply and discharge costs as they keep growing and growing over the life here of ourselves. As time goes by, costs keep getting greater. It starts bringing into the point that you may be able to look at opportunities within your facility to be able to make an economic application of a recycle reuse application. I also don't want to forget about conservation within facilities. Those are all things that we can do as an overall world here to help reduce some of the consumption of potable water and reuse some of the waters that we traditionally just send down the drain. A lot of our previous discussions were talking about how do you take some of those wastewaters and then turn them into something grand, and that'll be a little bit of this discussion also. So next slide, please. when we think about this, there's three basic things when you're ready to call to action and really get something moving. You've got to think about those drivers that we just showed on the first page. There may be several others that you may have at your own facility. But once you understand your drivers and you're basically put in a position that you have to start doing something, you've got three major steps that you've got to take to get going. You've got to evaluate and really understand your water footprint. We know that these industrial facilities and even municipal facilities use water different ways across the whole area of that plant, of that water treatment plant, or that chemical plant, or that power plant, or pharmaceutical manufacturer, right? There's different areas within the facility, and it really makes sense to do an overall water balance when you start looking at these types of things. If you don't understand where you're using the water and how you're using it and what types of quality waters are important for those different parts of your facility, you really aren't in a good position to move forward with a water recycle reuse opportunity and really setting up something that will work to benefit you and the whole world, essentially. You've got to set your goals at the beginning of these, of course. It's very important to understand that. Economics, part of the topic of our breakout session today is about the economics of these types of things. So you really do need to understand that. But as the first page showed, there are drivers that are not necessarily quantifiable by pure dollars and cents. There's things that we want to do as industrial good citizens of the world here. And if you're definitely selling to consumers, there's a benefit in potentially in advertising and marketing, being a good green type of a facility and a company. So you set your goals. We really need to understand that. You need to set that up, and then really you need to start moving into some actions. Next slide, please. When you think about this, I don't want us to forget about very basic opportunities for recycle reuse. I put this to the analogy of we probably all grew up and we were taught by our folks and family members and friends to shut off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth. It seems so simple. It's just a couple gallons of water during that few-minute session, but it does make a difference across the world. Again, let's think about this as how can we be good citizens of water and good stewards of our earth here while we're here? We should think about that. And a lot of these simple basic steps to potentially consume less potable water, they're really at our fingertips, and they may not be that complicated of a project. So don't forget the low-hanging fruit when you think about opportunities. Take a step back. Most of us are in areas where there's some amount of rain per year. I know you've got drought conditions and such, of course, but when those deluges of rains come, let's figure out ways to capture those. That water is relatively clean. And if we set up the right collection systems, it may be a very easy water to just put into your feed makeup tanks with very minimal treatment to be able to reuse that. And again, a little bit of that analogy back to leaving that faucet on. Maybe it doesn't feel like it's that much water, but it's the first step that a facility can take to start getting into that recycle reuse type mentality. Other lightly used waters, you may have process rinse waters, maybe during one of the last steps of your manufacturing that you're doing a wash down or rinse. That water coming off of that rinse process may be very lightly contaminated. Again, it's very important to go back and understand that water balance of your entire facility to really make a difference and find these low-hanging fruit that are lightly used waters. So I listed softener and DI rinse waters on here. This is not the regenerant water. This is not the water that has the bulk of the ionic load after you hit it with your chemistry to knock it off the resin beads. This is your later processes in the treatment step. When you're going through your regeneration, there's typically a fast rinse cycle. These are waters that are relatively clean. And if you're not already recycling those, if you're sending those to your wastewater discharge facility to be able to tackle within that plant, you might be able to take a load off of that part of the facility, and you may be able to just with minor cleanup, get those waters back to a process that will work well for you. Same thing with final product testing. There are a lot of facilities and industries that have to do a final rinse up, a final check, and a hydraulic test or something like that. Again, very clean waters. Of course, these types of easy things may be easier on the treatment side, but harder on the logistics side. So you may have to have conveyances and tanks and things like this set up. But again, these are very low risk, low intensive operations type applications, and they may readily be implementable. So Just let's not think about low-hanging fruit. So when you see that easy button, you might as well go for it, and it'll really get your facility tuned into the recycle culture. Next slide. The next one, we really start getting into complex applications. These are waters that are more highly polluted, highly contaminated during your process. You may look at your wastewater overall effluent. You may look at wastewater within specific point sources. When we've been involved with applications, a lot of times clients come to Evoqua and they say, I've got my end of pipe water quality and I'd like to treat it and reuse it at the front end. Well, by the time it gets commingled, there are typically some pretty good nasties involved with that once you commingle it, and now you've got to tackle those items. So instead of thinking about the end of pipe, sometimes we've had very good success going back to point source treatments. That does, again, create challenges because sometimes typically those point source treatments maybe are buried within inside of a facility. Property space is very tight in those. But point source has been very successful for us to evaluate how to get a minimal amount of polishing cleanup on a wastewater source to make it reusable versus that fully contaminated wastewater soup, kitchen soup kind of thing, you know, where everything in the is involved and stuck into that last bit of water that leaves the facility. RO reject, we've had very good success. Wendy hit on the CCR technology and how it's being evaluated. We've attacked that with that high recovery technology, and we've also attacked it with precipitation type processes and additional RO. And Russ was able to talk a little bit about ultra high pressure. There's things going on in the market and the industry that are getting us up to 1600 type PSI operating pressures on RO membranes. So that is allowing us to take highly concentrated waters and be able to treat them with what was traditionally not possible with RO. So again, as the suppliers and development companies in the membrane space are evolving, we get to benefit from that, and we try to stay in tune with that, of course. Cooling tower blowdown, another good potential application. Challenging, of course, but particulate filtration on that is pretty straightforward in a side stream. There are some good opportunities to do here. So the complexity of the project, of course, is going to be influenced by how your wastewater is contaminated to begin with and where you want to use it. Again, so that water balance is critical, really understanding where you're using it and what quality you really need to make it successful. Next slide, please. Feasibility testing is something I want to hit on. A lot of times we do paper designs, we sit at our desks, we open up our calculators and our books and such, and we start going at this, and we design systems with a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm a little bit old school, so I'll say that. Techies will use computer and iPads and such, but I'm still paper pencil kind of guy. So what we look at as an application engineering team is we design it on paper, but we also don't forget the criticalness of understanding these total life cycle costs and understanding how you have to think about the cleaning regimes, the frequency of the cleanings, the efficacy and success of a potential cleaning. Things like this are very critical to understand when you're trying to really capture and seeing if you're going to meet the goals. Economics are highly driven by the operating costs. Wendy hit on it, I think, really well. A lot of the success of a facility is going to be the long-term operations. You know, we know we can build plants and get it up and make it work for a week, but when you've got to make it work day in, day out for years and years, feasibility testing is going to be critical in part of your process to understand where you're at, understand that you can actually have predictable results that match your financial modeling. So wanted to make sure that we all thought through that. It typically, and you even saw it in a couple of the other presentations, where there's almost like a setup canary in the coal mine kind of a thing, where you're putting a side stream treatment process operation at a facility, and you're able to make tweaks in that part of the plant before you implement those across your large scale system. Again, to me, that's just a different type of feasibility. We at Evoqua have a couple different offerings that we take to the table, and I think it's really across the industry. We can do bench scale testing in our labs, our feasibility testing facilities. We could do on-site piloting, of course, and then I really like that canary in a coal mine. Even though we put in big systems, when we start trying to implement improvement cycles in water efficiency, instead of taking the whole 2,000 gallon a minute main train and playing with it like a science experiment, we play with a side stream train. We've had great success in that. practice also. So that's something that I would recommend to the organization to move forward with, is using something that you can play with, try all these situations out. Wastewaters, especially ones that are contaminated with organics, and if the wastewaters are unpredictable, that you're trying to recycle and reuse, it's very good to understand how the dynamics of that system would be week over week, month over month. Next slide. So we will get to a little bit of another shameless plug for Evoqua, but again, this is something that you all would want to look at when you're working on developing these types of opportunities. You want to work with a water partner, engineering firm, somebody like us. Of course, there's a lot of folks out there that play in this space, but you want to find somebody that has an analytical lab capability in-house. In my mind, that's critical. Testing some of these complex waters is very, very challenging to get reliable and predictable analytics to understand how you keep a finger on the pulse of that system. You want to work with teams that have an extensive amount of feasibility and lab testing space, so they can do those bench studies for you and really work with you to understand the long-term design aspects and operating costs of it. That third bullet point is really to key in on, you want to work with teams that are used to and understand the challenges of modeling a full-scale system at a couple milliliters per minute type flow rates. We all know that bench scale tests are very challenging in regards to, you're doing it on a very small scale, but you're working on extrapolating it to maybe a thousands of gallons a minute type of a system. So the scale up is important. You want to work with chemists and technicians that experienced in that art. There is science, of course, behind this all, but there's some and quite a bit of art to the operations of it, and especially when you think about scaling it up and making bench scale tests that are usable and predictable in the future. So I've listed a couple of the technologies that Evoqua has, and I've shown a couple pictures here that we think we wanted to show off that we have this type of capabilities in our labs. And again, as you partner with people going forward, these are the types of things you want to think about: the paper design, plus a bench scale, plus potentially a real world pilot in the field. And you will have a project that will meet your originally identified goals, and you will be a satisfied type of a situation. You know, the last thing anybody wants to do is get embarking on one of these monster projects and it not come true. So thanks, Patrick. Back to you.
Excellent. Mark, well done. And I even like that little note you wrote on the whiteboard behind you there. Well done. Well, hey, we'll bring the rest of the panel back on the screen here. And just, again, I think we're all, to some degree, maybe getting tired of this virtual world, but it is what it is. We certainly look forward to doing this in person again here soon, specifically next spring in Tampa. But that said, the one reminder, if you look to the right of your screen, you will see the chat feature. As much as this is a recorded session, that this panel will be live and in person on that chat feature. So feel free to fire away. Hopefully we'll find during the event that it is a very active component and feature of this panel. But with that, trying to tee up some genuine and some thought-provoking questions to complement what the team has presented. And, I'll start with just, one piece, and not that I'm playing favorites, but, Andy, I look at what you're talking about as a true, if we look at these water reuse projects and a large scale water reuse projects at that, they're really all about resiliency. And so there's this challenge of, shifting that mindset and looking at it from a dollar per acre foot perspective, and just looking at more of the holistic impact of what does it mean if there's a mega drought, or if there's fire or seismic activity, certainly on the western part of the U.S. I know I have had the opportunity and privilege to spend some time in Israel to see what the type of water leadership that's happening there. And I understand you've done some of the same, but can you go a little deeper in terms of how you've worked to shift that mindset away from that just pure dollar per acre foot?
Sure, I'll provide my observations. I don't want to take too much credit for what some really good scientists and kind of statisticians have done on this. Actually, I'll go to one of the projects that Wendy brought up, and she can elaborate on that more as a follow-up to this if she likes. But with SoCal, I was really impressed by the work that was done by Brent Haddad at UC Santa Cruz, looking at the economic impacts of not doing a project. And so it's not about dollars per acre foot, it's about the overall impact to a community of not having a reliable, high quality water supply. So I'll just put that off to the side, and like I said, if Wendy can follow up. Broadly speaking, I think that right now these long-range, robust programs that are being implemented are they're the minority, right? A lot of us, unfortunately, we're just reactive, and potable reuse gets implemented when we just absolutely need the water supply now. But I will point to some of the projects I highlighted. They're all real projects. And each of those has said, look, there is a catastrophic event in our future, whether it's a major drought, whether it's a fire in the watershed, whether it's a seismic event, and they build a system that provides what their community needs into the future. And it's not done based on dollars per acre foot. And I will conclude on the Israel. So I've been doing a bit of work for Mekarot out in Israel, and they supply the majority of water to the country. And when you walk their water system from north to south, east to west, starting at the desal, working through nearly 100% water reuse, in this case for agriculture, you get a really good idea of what a robust water infrastructure is, ability to withstand all sorts of Mother Nature challenges in a very arid climate. And I think it's important because it takes a major concern off of the shoulders of the policymakers and the engineers, and it allows them to focus their efforts on other things, knowing that they have built a system that will sustain generations with water.
That's great. That's great. Andy, I appreciate that. So let me, Wendy, Andy was good enough to reference some of your work. If I can, maybe play off of that a little bit. How would a municipality, maybe even an industrial facility, know whether a non-RO based approach is the best fit for them?
Yeah, I think that non-RO based treatment it's interesting. You would hope that you can make decisions based on entirely based on what the water quality says, and that's a good starting point. I think take a look at the salinity of your wastewater effluent as an indication as to whether or not maybe it's something that could work for you. Is it below 500 ppm of total dissolved solids, for example? That's a good starting point. But there are also regulatory constraints that may limit it in some instances. There are states like Virginia, for example, where HRSD sits, and they're evolving a regulatory framework. Arizona is another one where, as they are starting to enable more advanced potable reuse strategies in their regulatory framework, they're doing it in a more flexible way that enables carbon-based strategies. But in California, we still have certain performance-based regulatory criteria around total organic compounds that or content that makes it difficult for us to implement anything but RO under the circumstances. And so you've got to look at the regulatory framework. In California, most of the potable reuse strategies that are regulated, with the exception of groundwater recharge for surface spreading, are in some ways a bit limited. And so we have to start working with our regulators to explore, and we're doing so. I know Brian Caldwell's doing so, Carollo's doing so. There's a number of consultants who are working with agencies to start to explore how do we evolve this regulatory framework in a way that enables alternatives to reverse osmosis. But that's a process, and we all continue to walk through that. The other thing to non-RO based treatment, we were working, for instance, with LA Sanitation on DC Tillman, and we were doing a pilot that explored carbon-based strategies and showed that for them, under certain circumstances, it could really work for their groundwater recharge project. And it could save about 50% of the cost of a full advanced treatment strategy. But there are other considerations that have come about and evolved over the development of that project that would influence how you might apply that type of a treatment strategy. In their case, things like PFAS, as an example, or the salinity and the assimilative capacity in their groundwater basin moved them to having to explore other slight alternatives where they might introduce a side stream of reverse osmosis, for example, to knock down the salinity, to knock down the total organic content, to knock down the PFAS and other emerging contaminants. So there's a lot of ways that you can explore this and still be cost effective that I'd encourage. And then before I hand it back to you, I just wanted to make one other comment on what Andy shared, because Mekarot is doing some really incredible work. It was interesting as we were exploring trade-offs associated with alternative water supplies. We did some work with understanding some of the issues in Israel. And the thing that we learned there was you've got to take a step back and look at the entire urban water cycle, this interconnected water cycle. And they learned some interesting things about doing desal, seawater desal on the potable water side, combined with the incredible reuse strategies that they deploy for agriculture. And what they found was while boron was present in their seawater, that they needed to treat maybe only to a certain level in terms of the protection of public health for a drinking water supply. Once it made its way into the wastewater and was being treated for reuse, it had problems in terms of the agricultural use and the levels of boron. So they had to start applying treatment at the seawater desalination site, adding additional reverse osmosis to knock down that boron so that they could have a successful reuse strategy. And I think it's an interesting consideration that we haven't really touched on here, that you got to think about all of the system before you start moving forward with a project.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. That's great and very helpful with that. So just a couple more questions here, just to be mindful of everyone's time. We're running close up to our allotted time slot. But Zachary, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to ask, you mentioned one of the projects you talked about being one of the first MBR-based projects. And if I could tee it up this way, why was that the first one? What changed or what was unique about that project that kind of created that watershed moment, if you will?
Yeah, so the MWD's Regional Recycled Water Program, for them, there were two challenges, one from the water quality side and another one from the operational performance side. So when you are going to direct potable reuse, you can't have nitrate in the wastewater and also in the drinking water. So when you are treating non-nitrified secondary effluent that has a lot of ammonia in it, you need to nitrify and then denitrify to an extent to get the nitrate down to less than 10. So the first driver for them was the membrane performance. So I think Orange County Water District looked into it. Mehul was involved heavily with that. When you are treating a non-nitrified secondary effluent, you tend to have a higher fouling rate on the membranes. So MWD did not want it to get into that aspect in terms of having operational challenges with membrane performance. So they wanted to start with nitrified secondary effluent. And then you also wanted to provide membrane pretreatment for RO. So MBR does both of that in one process. So for them, it was a logical choice. And then once you nitrify, then you are dealing with nitrate, because now you have 50 milligrams of nitrate that you need to bring down to about 10 or less. And that's when RO can do a job. It can bring it down to a certain extent, but you also need some biological treatment if the limits are even stringent than less than 10. So adding denitrification process within MBR allows them to meet even stringent nitrate goals. So it was like getting them 3 objectives resolved in one process. And if they can replace the MF with MBR, that was a good choice for them. So that led to that thinking. And in general, the footprint is a big concern for all of these large facilities. Point Loma, there is no space to expand. And if you really want to continue the existing process or provide secondary treatment, you have to use a high mixed liquor process. And that tends to towards MBR, and it prepares the water for RO downstream. So there are very specific drivers for replacing MF with MBR if you can get through the permitting process and get the credits that the MBR process deserves.
That's great. Thanks, Zachar. Well, let me just ask one more question, and maybe kind of a parting thought, Mehul, if I can ask for you to kind of round us out and bring us home. But just given the impressive work that your team has done in Orange County, what advice would you give to other agencies wanting to pursue either an indirect or direct potable reuse project?
I think the number one thing is to make the need clear to your rate players.